What clings to the clothes? That night my son would not stop crying. But it was not the ordinary crying of a baby who is hungry or wet or simply wants to be held. These were screams, raw, guttural screams that tore through the small room like something was ripping the sound straight from his tiny lungs. Miguelito was only 1 year old, too young to tell me what was wrong, too young to explain why his little body trembled in my arms like a leaf caught in a storm. I held him close to my chest, feeling his heart pound against mine. His skin was ice cold. In the middle of a summer night so hot that sweat was rolling down my own back, my baby's skin felt like he had been dipped in river water at dawn. I pressed my palm to his forehead, searching for fever, searching for anything that would make sense. Nothing. No heat. Just that terrible, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into my own bones. The kerosene lamp on the table flickered, throwing shadows across the adobe walls. And that is when I noticed where Miguelito was looking. His eyes, those beautiful dark eyes that usually sparkled with curiosity and joy, were fixed on the corner of the room, the darkest corner where the lamp's weak light could not reach. He stared at that spot with an intensity that no baby should possess, his tiny hands clutching my blouse so hard I thought the fabric would tear. Then he screamed again, louder this time, and something in that corner seemed to breathe. I could not see it clearly, but I felt it, a presence, a weight in the darkness that had no business being there. My husband Ramiro stood beside us, helpless, his face pale in the dim light. He was a strong man, my Ramiro, with hands hardened by years of mixing cement and laying bricks. But in that moment he looked as lost as I felt. I wanted to tell him that everything would be fine. I wanted to believe it myself. But deep in my gut, in that place where a mother knows things she cannot explain, I understood that this was my fault. All of it. Every tear streaming down my baby's face, every tremor shaking his small body, every shadow that seemed to grow darker in the corners of our home. It all started with the clothes, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning so you understand how an ordinary woman like me, a woman who washes other people's laundry for a living, ended up fighting something that should not exist. My name is Marisol, and in the year this story takes place, I was 18 years old. I lived in a small village in Oaxaca, Mexico, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the church bells mark the hours, and where the old ways still hold power, even if the young people pretend they do not. I never knew my father. My mother died of a fever when I was 4 years old, leaving me with nothing but a faded photograph and a name I could barely remember. It was my grandmother, Doña Guadalupe, who raised me. Abuela Guadalupe was the strongest woman I ever knew. Her hands were rough as tree bark from decades of labor, her back slightly bent from years of bending over washing stones. But her eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. She had survived poverty, survived widowhood, survived the death of her only daughter, and through it all she had kept going. She taught me everything I know about work, about faith, and about the things that lurk in places we cannot see. Our family had been lavanderas for 3 generations, washerwomen. We took in other people's dirty clothes, scrubbed them clean in the river, and returned them smelling of soap and sunshine. It was honest work, hard work, the kind of work that left your fingers pruned and your shoulders aching, but put food on the table and a roof over your head. I remember those early mornings with my grandmother walking down the dirt path to the river before the sun had fully risen. The water was always cold, so cold it made my teeth chatter, but I loved watching the soap foam swirl away in the current. I loved the sound of wet cloth slapping against stone, the rhythm of it like a heartbeat. And I loved my grandmother's voice singing old songs in a mix of Spanish and Zapotec songs about love and loss and spirits that wandered the earth. Clothes carry more than dirt, Marisol, she would tell me as we worked side by side. They carry the emotions of the people who wear them, their sadness, their anger, their fear. All of it soaks into the fabric, and if you are not careful, those things can follow you home. I would nod and smile, thinking she was just being superstitious. Old people were like that, I told myself. They believed in things that modern education had proven were nonsense. Ghosts, curses, evil spirits. These were stories to frighten children into behaving nothing more. By the time I was 16, I had my own clients. Women from the wealthier families in the village who did not want to ruin their soft hands with harsh soap. I was good at my work, careful with delicate fabrics, thorough with stubborn stains. Word spread, and soon I had more business than I could handle alone. Then I met Ramiro. He was 20 years old, a laborer who helped the local masons build houses and walls. He was not handsome in the way of movie stars, but he had kind eyes and a gentle smile. And when he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. We courted for 6 months before I discovered I was pregnant. There was no grand wedding. We could not afford one. Instead, Ramiro rented a small room at the edge of the village, barely big enough for a bed and a table, and we moved in together. My grandmother did not approve of us living in sin, but she accepted it because she loved me, and because she knew that sometimes life does not follow the rules we wish it would. Miguelito was born on a rainy night in July. From the moment I held him in my arms, I knew I would die for him. He was perfect with his father's strong chin and my grandmother's dark, intelligent eyes. He was the best thing I had ever done, the best thing I would ever do. Our life was simple but good. Ramiro left for work at dawn. I stayed home with the baby and washed clothes, and in the evenings we sat together on the doorstep watching the sun set over the mountains. I thought I had everything I needed. I thought I was safe. I should have listened to my grandmother. She came to visit us, often bringing herbs from her garden and food she had cooked. But she also brought warnings that I was too young and too foolish to heed. Before you start washing for someone new, she told me one afternoon, holding the rosary she always wore around her neck, you must pray. Ask God to protect your hands and your heart from what is not yours to carry, and never ever work without this. She pressed a rosary into my palm. It was old, the wooden beads worn smooth by generations of fingers, the silver crucifix tarnished with age. It had belonged to her mother and her mother's mother before that. Abuela, I said, trying not to sound impatient, these are just superstitions. Clothes are just clothes. They cannot hurt anyone. She looked at me with eyes that had seen more than I could imagine, and for a moment I thought I saw fear in them. I have been washing clothes for nearly 50 years, she said quietly. I have seen things you cannot imagine. I have seen women who ignored the old ways pay with their health, their sanity, their lives. Promise me you will be careful. I promised, but I did not mean it. I tucked the rosary into a drawer and forgot about it. I did not pray before I worked. I did not protect myself with the rituals she had taught me, because I was young, and the young always think they know better than those who came before. Sometimes after washing certain loads of laundry, I would feel strangely tired. Not the normal exhaustion of hard work, but something deeper, something that settled into my bones and would not leave no matter how much I slept. And sometimes I had dreams, strange dreams filled with faces I did not recognize and places I had never been. I would wake up feeling like I had not rested at all, like something had drained me during the night. But I always found explanations. I was tired because the baby kept me up. The dreams were just dreams, the random firings of a sleeping brain. There was nothing supernatural about it. There could not be. I was wrong. Everything changed the day Fernanda came to see me. Fernanda was one of my best clients, a woman in her late 20s who lived in a nice house on the east side of the village. Her husband owned a small store, and they were comfortable enough to pay someone else to do their washing. She was kind, always paid on time, and sometimes gave me extra when I did good work. That afternoon she sat in my small room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and asked me for a favor. My brother Sebastian just came back from the United States, she said. He has been there for almost 10 years working, saving money. Now he is home and he wants to build a house here, start a new life. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. He brought back a lot of clothes. Nice things, expensive. He needs someone trustworthy to wash them for him, someone who will be careful. I thought of you immediately. I agreed, of course. Another client meant more money, and we needed every peso we could get. Ramiro's work was irregular, and babies were expensive. The first time I went to Fernanda's house to pick up her brother's laundry, I met Sebastian. He was standing in the doorway when I arrived, a tall man in his early 30s with sun-darkened skin and the confident bearing of someone who had seen the world beyond our little village. He wore a clean white shirt and jeans that looked new, and when he smiled at me, I saw that his teeth were straight and white, probably fixed by an American dentist. "You must be Marisol," he said, extending his hand. "My sister speaks highly of you." I reached out to shake his hand, and the moment our skin touched, I felt it. A chill, not on the surface, but deep inside, like a cold finger tracing down my spine. The hair on my arm stood up, and for just a second, I had the strangest feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a handshake. Just skin touching skin, nothing more. Maybe I was coming down with something. Maybe the weather was changing. "It is nice to meet you," I said, forcing a smile. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I picked up Sebastian's laundry every Monday, washed it with extra care because the fabrics were finer than what I usually handled, and returned it on Thursday. The clothes were mostly dress shirts, good jeans, underwear that cost more than I earned in a week. I used the special soap he bought for me, handled everything gently, and made sure nothing was damaged. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice changes. The first time I saw him looking unwell, I thought he might have caught a cold. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he had not been sleeping. The second time, he looked worse. His hands trembled slightly when he handed me the bag of clothes, and his skin had taken on a grayish tint that did not look healthy. Then came the day I noticed the stains. I had brought Sebastian's laundry home as usual and was sorting through it before washing. Most of the clothes were normally dirty, nothing unusual. But one white shirt had marks on it that made me pause, red marks, brownish red like dried blood. Not a lot, but enough to notice. And another shirt had stains that were yellowish green with a smell that turned my stomach, like vomit, but worse somehow, like something rotting from the inside out. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he had cut himself shaving. Maybe he had been sick. People got sick all the time, but the smell was wrong. It was not the usual smell of dirty clothes, not sweat or food or any of the normal things that made laundry unpleasant. This was heavier, darker, like meat left too long in the sun, like death. I washed everything anyway. I scrubbed until my arms ached, used extra soap, rinsed until the water ran clear. But the stains were stubborn, and some of them barely faded no matter what I did. When I finished, I was exhausted. Not tired, exhausted. My body felt like I had been working for days without rest, and my mind was foggy slow like I was thinking through mud. I barely had energy to hang the clothes to dry before collapsing onto my bed. That night I dreamed. I was standing at the edge of a pool of black water, still as glass. The air was cold, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a woman singing. The song had no words, just a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I looked down into the water wanting to see my reflection, but the face that looked back at me was not mine. It was a woman's face, beautiful once, but twisted now into something horrible. Her eyes were completely black, no white, no iris, just two pools of darkness that seemed to go on forever. Her mouth was open, and where teeth should have been, there was nothing. Just a black hole of void stretching wider and wider as if she was trying to swallow the world. She smiled at me, and then she said my name, Marisol. I woke up screaming. My own voice tore me out of the nightmare, and I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Sweat soaked my nightgown. My hands were shaking, and I could still feel those black eyes watching me even though I knew I was awake. Then I heard another sound. Miguelito was crying. Not his usual fussy cry, not the sound he made when he was hungry or needed changing. This was different. This was the sound of pure terror of a baby who had seen something that no baby should ever see. I ran to his cradle and scooped him up, holding him against my chest. His little body was cold, so cold, and he was staring at the corner of the room with wide, frightened eyes, the same corner that would haunt us for weeks to come. "Shh, my love," I whispered, rocking him gently. "There is nothing there." Nothing at all, but even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie, and from that night everything began to change. The days that followed were strange, though I tried my best to pretend they were not. Miguelito had always been an easy baby. From the time he was 3 months old, he slept through the night, waking only once or twice for feeding, before settling back into peaceful slumber. He rarely cried without reason, and when he did, the cause was always obvious. Hunger, a wet diaper, the need to be held, simple things with simple solutions. But after that night, after the nightmare and the screaming, something shifted. He became restless in ways I could not understand. During the day, he seemed fine, playing with the wooden rattle Ramiro had carved for him, babbling happily when I sang to him. But as soon as the sun began to set, as soon as the shadows started to lengthen across the floor of our small room, he would change. His eyes would grow wide and watchful, darting to corners of the room as if tracking something I could not see. He would whimper, then cry, then scream, and nothing I did could calm him. "He is just going through a phase," Ramiro said one evening, trying to sound reassuring, even though I could see the worry in his eyes. "Babies do this sometimes. My mother said I was the same way when I was teething." I wanted to believe him. I held onto his words like a drowning woman holds onto a rope, desperate for something that made sense. Teething. Yes, that had to be it. Babies were uncomfortable when their teeth came in. It made them irritable, made them cry for no apparent reason. This was normal, this was explainable. But teething did not explain why my son's skin sometimes felt ice cold to the touch, even when the room was warm. Teething did not explain why he stared at the dark corner of our room with an intensity that made my blood run cold. And teething certainly did not explain the growing sense of dread that settled over me every time I entered our home. One night, about a week after the nightmare, I was sitting on the bed with Miguelito in my arms. He had been crying for nearly an hour, his little face red and wet with tears, his body rigid with distress. I had tried everything: nursing, rocking, singing, walking him around the room. Nothing worked. Then I noticed where he was looking. It was the same corner as always. The corner where the light from our kerosene lamp could not quite reach, where shadows pooled like dark water. Miguelito was staring at that spot with his mouth open, tears still streaming down his cheeks, but silent now, completely silent, as if whatever he saw there had stolen his voice. "What are you looking at, my love?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. I did not look at the corner. I could not bring myself to do it. Instead, I felt it. A presence there, heavy and watchful, like eyes pressing against my skin from across the room. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the night. "It is nothing," I told myself firmly. "Just shadows. Just my tired mind playing tricks on me." But Miguelito did not look away for a long time. And when he finally did, when exhaustion finally claimed him and he fell asleep against my chest, I could have sworn I heard something in that corner, a sound so soft it might have been nothing at all, like fabric rustling, like someone shifting their weight. I did not sleep that night. The feeling of being watched began shortly after that. It started at the river where I went every morning to wash the clothes I had collected from my clients. The washing spot was a peaceful place, a bend in the river where the water ran clear and smooth over flat stones that had been used by lavanderas for generations. Usually I enjoyed my time there. The sound of the water was soothing. The morning air was fresh, and there was a simple satisfaction in watching dirty fabric become clean. But now something felt different. I would be kneeling at the water's edge, scrubbing a shirt or wringing out a sheet, and suddenly I would feel it. A prickling at the back of my neck, like invisible fingers brushing against my skin. The sensation that someone was standing behind me, watching me, waiting for me to turn around. Every time I looked, there was no one there. Just the trees along the riverbank, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Just the birds calling to each other in the branches above. Just the water flowing endlessly toward the sea. The wind, I told myself. It is just the wind on my neck. Nothing more. But the wind did not explain the cold that came with the watching. A deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the air or the water. A cold that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere inside me, spreading outward until my whole body shivered. And the wind did not explain the whispers. They were so faint at first that I thought I was imagining them. Just sounds at the edge of hearing, like voices carried from very far away. But as the days passed, they grew clearer. Not clear enough to make out words, but clear enough to recognize that they were voices. A woman's voice, I thought, sometimes more than one, murmuring things I could not understand in a language that might not have been any human language at all. I never told anyone about the whispers. I was afraid that if I said them out loud, I would have to admit that something was truly wrong. And I was not ready to do that. Not yet. Meanwhile, Sebastian was getting worse. Every week when I went to Fernanda's house to collect his laundry, I saw the change in him. The first time I noticed he looked unwell, I had thought it was just a cold, just fatigue from adjusting to life back in Mexico after so many years away. But it was more than that. Much more. His face grew thinner, the bones of his cheeks and jaw becoming sharper, more prominent. His skin took on a grayish pallor that no amount of sunshine seemed to cure. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, deep purple bruises that made him look like he had not slept in weeks. And his hands, those strong hands that had worked construction and restaurant jobs in America, now trembled constantly as if he could not control them. One Thursday afternoon, when I came to return his clean clothes, he was not waiting at the door as usual. It was Fernanda who met me instead, and the look on her face made my stomach clench with dread. "Come inside," she said quietly. "I need to talk to you." She led me to the kitchen, away from the room where her brother was resting, and poured me a glass of water with hands that were not quite steady. "Marisol," she began, then stopped, pressing her lips together as if trying to hold back words she did not want to say. "How much do you know about what has been happening to my brother?" I shook my head slowly. "Only what I have seen, that he is not well, that he is getting worse." Fernanda nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The doctors cannot find anything wrong with him. They have done tests, taken blood, looked at everything they know how to look at. They say he is healthy. But you have seen him. Does he look healthy to you?" "No," I admitted. "He does not." She was silent for a long moment, staring down at her hands clasped on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Before Sebastian came back to Mexico, he was seeing a woman. Her name was Yolanda. She lives in Teotitlan, the village on the other side of the mountain. They met at a festival, started spending time together. He thought it was just casual, nothing serious, but she wanted more. She wanted him to marry her. What happened? He told her no. He said he was not ready, that he had just come home and needed time to figure out his life before making that kind of commitment. Fernanda paused, swallowing hard. She did not take it well. A cold feeling was spreading through my chest, though I did not fully understand why yet. "What do you mean?" "I mean she was furious. She said things, threatened things. My brother did not take her seriously. He thought she was just upset that she would get over it." Fernanda finally looked up at me, and I saw fear in her eyes, real fear. But she did not get over it. And now he is wasting away, and the doctors cannot explain it. And I think she did something to him. The word hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Brujeria. "Witchcraft. You think she cursed him?" I said. "It was not a question." Fernanda nodded miserably. I took him to see Don Cirillo, the curandero who lives at the edge of the village. He said Sebastian has been touched by something dark, something that is eating him from the inside. He is trying to help, but the damage was already done before we even knew what was happening. My mind was racing, trying to process what she was telling me. Curses, dark energy, things I had dismissed as superstition my entire life, things my grandmother had tried to warn me about and I had refused to believe. And then a terrible thought occurred to me. Fernanda, I said slowly, when you asked me to wash Sebastian's clothes, did you know about this? Her face crumpled with guilt. I suspected. I did not know for sure, not then. And I thought that maybe if nothing was really wrong, then it would not matter. And if something was wrong, well, clothes are just clothes. How could washing them hurt anyone? Clothes carry more than dirt. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, and suddenly I felt sick. The fatigue I had been feeling after every load of Sebastian's laundry. The strange dreams. The whispers at the river. The cold that seemed to follow me everywhere now. She should have told me, I whispered, my voice shaking. Before I started. She should have warned me, I am sorry. Fernanda was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks. I am so sorry. I did not think it could spread. I did not know, but it could spread. And it had. I left Fernanda's house in a daze, my mind churning with fear and anger and a growing sense of dread. All those weeks I'd been washing Sebastian's clothes with my bare hands, soaking them in water that I then touched, wringing them out, hanging them to dry. No prayers, no protection, no rosary around my neck. I had ignored every warning my grandmother ever gave me, and now something dark had found its way into my life. I needed to see her. I needed to tell her what had happened and beg her to help me fix it. My grandmother's house was a 15-minute walk from my own, a small adobe structure with a garden full of herbs and flowers that she used for cooking and medicine, and things she never fully explained. When I arrived, she was sitting on the porch, weaving a basket from dried palm leaves, her gnarled fingers moving with the ease of long practice. She looked up as I approached, and her hands went still. Something has happened, she said. It was not a question. I sat down beside her and I told her everything. The clothes with the strange stains, the exhaustion that followed every wash, the nightmares about the woman with black eyes. The way Miguelito cried at night, staring at corners where nothing should be, the feeling of being watched, the whispers I almost heard. My grandmother listened in silence, her face growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she set aside her basket and took my hands in hers. I warned you, she said quietly. I told you to pray. I told you to wear the rosary. I told you that clothes carry the burdens of those who wear them, and if you are not protected, those burdens can become yours. Tears were streaming down my face now. I know, I am sorry. I thought it was just superstition. I thought those old beliefs did not mean anything. She squeezed my hands, not in anger, but in sorrow. The old beliefs exist because they are true, Marisol. They have been passed down through generations, because our ancestors learned through suffering that there are things in this world that cannot be seen, but can still harm us. You were arrogant, and now you're paying for it. But that does not mean you cannot be saved. She stood up and went inside, returning a moment later with items I recognized from my childhood. A small bottle of holy water from the church, a bundle of dried herbs, ruda and romero and albahaca tied together with red string, and the rosary, the one she had given me months ago, the one I had tucked into a drawer and forgotten. Every morning, she said, pressing the holy water into my hands, sprinkle this on your face and hands before you leave the house. Every night, burn these herbs and let the smoke pass over your body. It will help cleanse what has attached itself to you. And wear the rosary. She placed it around my neck herself, the wooden beads cool against my skin. Never take it off, not even when you sleep. I clutched the items like they were lifelines, which perhaps they were. Will this be enough? My grandmother's expression was grave. It will help. But if the darkness has already entered your home, if it is already affecting Miguelito, You will need more than this. You need to see Don Cirillo. He has the knowledge and the power to cut the connection between you and whatever has latched onto you." She paused, and I saw something in her eyes that frightened me more than anything else had. "But Marisol, there is something you must understand. When dark energy is driven out of one person, it does not simply vanish. It looks for somewhere else to go, someone else to inhabit. And it always seeks the weakest, the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable. My baby." She was talking about my baby. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "No, I will not let anything hurt him. I will not." "Then you must be strong." She gripped my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. "Stronger than you have ever been. If you show fear, it will feed on that fear and grow more powerful. Your faith is your weapon. Your love for your son is your shield. Do not let either one waver." I left my grandmother's house with my arms full of protective items and my heart full of terror. The sun was already sinking toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that should have been beautiful but instead felt ominous, like a warning written in fire. The walk home usually took me 15 minutes. That evening it felt like hours. I was about halfway there, walking along the dirt road that wound between fields of dry corn and clusters of mesquite trees when I first felt it. The cold. It started at the back of my neck just like it did at the river, but stronger this time, more insistent, as if someone had pressed an ice cube directly against my spine. I shivered and walked faster, clutching the bundle of herbs and holy water to my chest. The sun was lower now, almost touching the peaks of the mountains. The shadows of the trees stretched long and dark across the road, and the air had taken on that strange quality it sometimes has at dusk, when the light is dying and the world seems caught between day and night. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself the cold was just the evening breeze, that the goosebumps on my arms were just because the temperature was dropping. Then I heard it. A rustling sound, soft and barely audible, like fabric brushing against fabric. It came from behind me. I spun around. The road was empty. Just dirt and stones and the long shadows of the trees. No one there. I turned back and kept walking faster now. The rustling came again, closer this time, closer and louder. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin and wavering. "Is someone there?" Silence. Just the evening wind stirring the leaves of the mesquite. "It is nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just animals, just the wind. Nothing is following me." But I did not believe it. Every instinct I had was screaming that I was wrong, that something was there, something just out of sight, something waiting. I turned around once more. And she was there. A woman standing in the middle of the road, less than a meter behind me, tall and thin, wrapped in a black rebozo that covered her entire body and head, hiding her face in shadow. She stood perfectly still, like a statue, like she had been standing there for hours, even though I knew the road had been empty just seconds before. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Jesus Christ!" I gasped, the words coming out in a rush. "You scared me." No response. The woman did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. She just stood there, wrapped in that black shroud, her face hidden in darkness. "Señora," I tried again, my voice shaking. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" Nothing. No movement, no sound. And then I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. I had not heard footsteps. I had been walking on a dirt road, the kind where every step kicks up a little cloud of dust, where even the lightest footfall makes a soft, crunching sound. I had heard no footsteps but my own, no sound of someone approaching, no warning at all. Yet she was there, close enough to touch. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you want, silence?" The figure stood motionless, impossibly still, not even swaying in the evening breeze. I took a step backward, then another. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the holy water. "I need to go home," I said, as if explaining myself to this silent specter could somehow make her go away. "My baby is waiting for me." I turned and started walking fast, almost running. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder. She was still there, still the same distance behind me, still perfectly silent. How was that possible? I was nearly running my legs, pumping my breath, coming in short gasps. She had not appeared to move at all, yet she was no farther away than before, following me like a shadow that had detached itself from its source. I walked faster. Glanced back again. Still there. Still less than a meter behind me. Panic seized me. I broke into a full run, my sandals slapping against the dirt road, the items in my arms bouncing against my chest. I did not look back. I could not. I just ran toward home, ran toward safety, ran away from whatever that thing was that followed me without footsteps, without sound, without any natural movement at all. When I finally reached my house, I threw myself through the door and slammed it shut behind me, pressing my back against the wood, gasping for breath. My whole body was shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Ramiro rushed toward me from across the room, his face alarmed. "Marisol, what happened? You look like you have seen a ghost." I could not answer. I could barely breathe. I stumbled to the window and looked outside. The road was empty. The woman was gone, vanished as if she had never existed at all. But I knew better. I knew she had been real. I knew she had followed me silent and patient through the fading light, and I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones like ice that she would come back. That night was the worst yet. Miguelito screamed for hours, his tiny body rigid with terror, his eyes fixed on the corner of the room where the shadows gathered thick and dark. Nothing could console him, not nursing, not rocking, not singing, not praying. He screamed until his voice was raw, until my arms ached from holding him, until Ramiro was pacing the floor with tears streaming down his face, and in the corner, in that damned corner, I could feel it now. Not see it clearly, not yet, but feel it. A presence heavy and watchful, pressing against my awareness like a hand against a window. Something that moved when it should not move, that shifted and rippled like smoke given form. I held my son close and began to pray, the words spilling from my lips in a desperate torrent. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." The presence in the corner seemed to pulse, to grow heavier. "Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Miguelito's screams softened to whimpers, or maybe I just could not hear them any more over the pounding of my own heart. "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." The weight in the corner shuddered, and then slowly it began to recede. By the time dawn broke, Miguelito was finally asleep, his small body limp with exhaustion against my chest. Ramiro had collapsed on the bed, still dressed, dark circles under his eyes. And I sat in the chair by the window, watching the light creep across the floor, driving back the shadows that had tormented us all night. But I knew this was not over. I knew that whatever had followed me home, whatever had been lurking in the corner of our room, was not gone. It was waiting, gathering strength, preparing for another assault. I had to see Don Cirillo. I had to do it today, because if I waited any longer, I was not sure any of us would survive. As if hearing my thoughts, a sound drifted through the window on the morning air. A woman's voice, faint and distant, singing a melody without words, the same melody from my nightmares. I left for Don Cirillo's house as soon as the sun was fully up, leaving Miguelito in Ramiro's care with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone, and to keep praying if anything strange happened. My husband looked at me like I had lost my mind, but he did not argue. He had seen enough in the past weeks to know that something was terribly wrong, even if he could not bring himself to name it. The curandero lived at the far edge of the village in a small house surrounded by a garden that seemed to bloom with impossible abundance. Even in the dry season, when most gardens were brown and withered, Don Cirillo's plants thrived. Flowers of every color spilled over low adobe walls. Herbs grew in neat rows, their fragrance filling the air with scents I could not identify but found strangely calming. It was as if the house existed in its own small pocket of the world, protected from the harshness that touched everything else. A woman answered my knock, elderly but with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She must have been Don Cirillo's wife, though I had never met her before. "You are here to see my husband," she said. It was not a question. "Come in. He has been expecting you." She led me through a small living room cluttered with dried herbs and candles and objects I did not recognize, into a kitchen that smelled of copal smoke and something else, something earthy and ancient. Don Cirillo was standing at the stove stirring a pot of something that bubbled and steamed. He was not what I expected. He was perhaps 60 years old, heavy-set, with large, calloused hands and a face weathered by decades of sun. His eyes were half closed, giving him a sleepy appearance. But when he turned to look at me, I saw a sharpness in them that made me catch my breath. "Sit down, daughter," he said, gesturing to a wooden chair at the kitchen table. "We have much to discuss and not much time." I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from trembling. "You know why I am here." He nodded slowly, setting down his wooden spoon and lowering himself into the chair across from me. "I know about Sebastian. I have been treating him for several weeks now. And I know that you have been washing his clothes without protection, without prayer, without any of the safeguards that might have kept you safe." "Fernanda should have warned me," I said, hearing the bitterness in my own voice. "Yes, she should have." Don Cirillo's voice held no judgment, only a weary acceptance. But she was afraid. Afraid you would refuse to help, afraid of what it would mean to admit that her brother had been touched by darkness. Fear makes people do foolish things, daughter. It makes them keep secrets that should never be kept. "What exactly happened to Sebastian?" I asked. "What did that woman do to him?" Don Cirillo was silent for a long moment, his half-closed eyes fixed on something I could not see. "Yolanda," he finally said. "That is her name. She lives in Teotitlan on the other side of the mountain. She is not a true bruja, not in the traditional sense. She does not have the gift, the calling, the years of training that true practitioners possess. But she knows enough to be dangerous, enough to open doors that should remain closed. What kind of doors? The doors between our world and other places. Places where things live that have no business in the realm of the living." Don Cirillo leaned forward, his sleepy eyes suddenly intense. When Sebastian rejected her, Yolanda was consumed by rage and jealousy. She performed a ritual, something she probably found in a book, or learned from someone who should have known better than to teach her. She thought she was cursing him, binding him to her, making him suffer for breaking her heart. But she did not understand what she was truly doing. The ritual she performed did not just curse Sebastian. It called something old, something hungry, and that something answered. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the kitchen. "What is it?" Don Cirillo shook his head. "It has no name that human tongues can speak. It exists in the spaces between worlds, feeding on negative emotions, fear, anger, hatred, jealousy." When Yolanda performed her ritual with a heart full of those things, she rang a dinner bell that echoed across dimensions. And something came to feast. "The woman," I whispered. "The woman who followed me. The one in the black rebozo. That is one of its forms, yes. It shows itself differently to different people, taking shapes that will inspire the most fear. To you it appears as a woman because women have always been central to your life, your work, your identity. It knows what frightens you, daughter. It has been learning. I thought of Miguelito, of the way he stared at the corner of our room, and my heart clenched with terror. My son," I said. "He sees something too, something I cannot always see." Don Cirillo's expression grew grave. "Children are more sensitive to these things than adults. They have not yet learned to filter out what society tells them cannot exist. Your son sees it more clearly than you do, which means it has been watching him, studying him." Why would it care about a baby? Because children are pure. Their energy is untainted by the compromises and corruptions of adult life. To something like this, a child's essence is like the finest wine. He paused, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been pity. "And because you love him more than anything in the world, your fear for him is the most powerful fear you possess. It feeds on that." I felt tears burning in my eyes. How do I stop it? How do I protect him? Don Cirillo stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. He opened it and began removing items: candles of various colors, bundles of dried herbs, a bottle of clear liquid that might have been holy water, and something wrapped in red cloth that he handled with particular care. "I can perform Olympia," he said, setting the items on the table between us. "A cleansing ritual. It will sever the connection between you and the darkness that has attached itself to you. When I cut that cord, the entity will lose its hold on you." Hope flared in my chest. "Then do it, please, do it now." But Don Cirillo held up a hand, his expression somber. "You must understand something first. When dark energy is forced out of one vessel, it does not simply cease to exist. It must go somewhere, and it will seek the path of least resistance. The most vulnerable target it can find." The hope in my chest turned to ice. "Miguelito, yes. When I perform the cleansing, the entity will try to transfer itself to your son. He is young, his defenses are weak, and he has already been marked by its attention. He will become its new host unless we are prepared." No. I was on my feet without realizing I had moved my chair, clattering to the floor behind me. "No, I will not let that happen. I would rather die myself than let anything hurt my son." "Sit down, daughter." Don Cirillo's voice was calm but firm. "I am not saying we should abandon your son to this fate. I am saying you must be prepared for what comes next. When I sever the connection, the entity will fight back. It will target Miguelito because he is vulnerable. He will become ill, very ill. You will think you are losing him." I sank back into my chair, my legs unable to support me. But if you are strong, if you maintain your faith, if you follow every instruction I give you, you can protect him. The entity cannot possess someone who is surrounded by love and faith and the proper protections. It can only take root in fear and despair. If you refuse to give in to those emotions, if you keep fighting, your son will survive. How can you be sure I have done this before?" Don Cirillo's eyes met mine, and in them I saw decades of battles fought in the space between light and darkness. Not every family I have helped has succeeded. Some have been consumed by their fear. Some have lost faith at the critical moment. But the ones who stood firm, who refused to surrender no matter how dark things became, they survived. Their children survived. I thought of my grandmother, of her warnings, of the rosary she had given me. I thought of Ramiro, of the way he looked at our son with such love. I thought of Miguelito himself, his innocent smile, his tiny hands reaching for my face. "Tell me what to do," I said, "and I will do it, whatever it takes." The cleansing ritual took place that afternoon in the small room behind Don Cirillo's kitchen that served as his workspace. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of herbs, bottles of oils, and objects whose purposes I could not guess. Candles burned in each corner, their flames steady despite the lack of any visible draft. The air was thick with the smoke of copal incense, sweet and heavy and somehow comforting. I sat in the center of the room on a low stool while Don Cirillo moved around me, chanting in a language I did not recognize. It might have been Zapotec, the indigenous tongue of our region, or it might have been something older still. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, resonating in my chest like the bass notes of a song. He passed bundles of burning herbs over my body, the smoke curling around me like a living thing. He sprinkled holy water on my head, my hands, my feet. He pressed his palms against my temples and spoke words that made the candles flicker and dance. And I felt it. The darkness that had been clinging to me, that had followed me home and invaded my dreams and watched me from shadows, I felt it stir. It was like having something inside me that I had not known was there, a parasite that had burrowed so deep I had mistaken it for part of myself. Now, as Don Cirillo's words washed over me, I felt it writhing, fighting, trying to hold on. "Do not resist," Don Cirillo said, his voice cutting through the haze of smoke and sound. "Let it go, release it." I closed my eyes and tried to do as he said. I imagined the darkness as a physical thing, a black tar coating my insides. And I pictured it flowing out of me, draining away like water through a sieve. The sensation was indescribable. It felt like vomiting and crying and bleeding all at once, a purging so complete it left me hollow and trembling. I heard myself making sounds, gasping and moaning, but I could not stop them. Something was being torn out of me, something that had sunk its hooks deep, and the removal was agonizing. And then suddenly it was over. I slumped forward on the stool, barely able to hold myself upright. My entire body was drenched in sweat, my muscles weak as water, but I felt lighter, cleaner, as if a weight I had been carrying for weeks had finally been lifted. "It is done," Don Cirillo said. He looked nearly as exhausted as I felt, his face drawn and pale. "The connection is severed. It can no longer reach you directly." "But Miguelito," I whispered. "Go home to him, stay by his side, and remember what I told you." He handed me a small bundle wrapped in red cloth, the same one I had seen him remove from the cabinet. "This is a protection charm. Keep it on your son at all times. Burn the herbs I gave you every night. Pray without ceasing. And no matter what happens, no matter how frightened you become, do not lose faith." I took the charm with trembling hands. "And if I do everything right, if I am strong enough, then in a few days, perhaps a week, the entity will exhaust itself, trying to break through your defenses. It will retreat, look for easier prey, and your family will be safe." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that faith and love and a bundle of herbs could protect my son from something that had no name, no form, no place in the rational world. But I had seen the woman in the black rebozo. I had felt the cold that came with her presence, and I knew deep in my bones that the battle was only beginning. The first night after the cleansing, Miguelito developed a fever. It started mild, just a slight warmth when I pressed my lips to his forehead, checking him the way mothers have checked their children since the beginning of time. 38 degrees, perhaps. Nothing alarming on its own. Babies got fevers all the time. It was part of growing up, part of building an immune system. But I knew better. I knew this was not a normal fever. I gave him the medicine the village pharmacy sold for infant fevers, held him close and prayed. Ramiro watched us with worried eyes but said nothing. He did not understand what was happening, not fully, but he had stopped questioning me. He had seen too much to doubt anymore. That night, Miguelito slept fitfully but without screaming. The corner of the room remained dark, but I did not feel any presence watching from within it. I allowed myself a small hope that perhaps Don Cirillo had been wrong, that perhaps the entity had given up already. I should have known better. The second night the fever climbed. 39 degrees, then 39.5. My son's small body burned like a furnace. His skin flushed red, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He would not eat, barely slept. And when he did sleep, he whimpered and twitched as if fighting battles in his dreams. I sent Ramiro to fetch my grandmother. She came immediately, her arms full of the supplies she had been preparing since I first told her what was happening. More herbs, more holy water, oils infused with rosemary and camphor, and other things she would not name. She took one look at Miguelito, and her face set into grim lines. "It has begun," she said, "the battle for your son." She worked through the night, rubbing oils on his chest and feet, burning herbs so the smoke filled our small room, praying in a low, steady voice that never wavered. I joined her, reciting every prayer I had ever learned, clutching the rosary so tightly the beads left marks on my palms. Ramiro sat in the corner, his face pale, his hands clasped between his knees. He was praying too, I realized. My husband, who had never been particularly religious, was moving his lips in silent prayer. The fever held steady but did not climb higher. By dawn, Miguelito was sleeping peacefully, his breathing regular, his skin cool to the touch. "We did it," I said, exhausted but hopeful. "It is over." My grandmother shook her head. "This was just the first assault. It is testing your defenses, looking for weaknesses. Tonight will be worse." She was right. The third night was when everything changed. Miguelito's fever spiked to 40 degrees. His little body alternated between burning hot and ice cold as if two forces were fighting for control. He screamed for hours, that terrible scream I remembered from before, the scream of a child who sees things no child should see. And then Ramiro spoke the words I had been dreading. Marisol. His voice was barely a whisper. There is something in the corner. I did not want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my eyes on my son, to not acknowledge the thing that had invaded our home, but I could not stop myself. I turned my head just slightly, just enough to see. It was there. A shape in the shadows, darker than the darkness around it. Not fully formed, not clearly visible, but undeniably present. It seemed to pulse with a rhythmic motion, like breathing, like a heartbeat. And although it had no eyes that I could see, I felt its gaze on me, heavy, hungry, waiting. "Do not look at it," my grandmother said sharply. "Focus on the child. Keep praying." I tore my eyes away and turned back to Miguelito. His screams had faded to whimpers, his wide eyes still fixed on that corner, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. "Our Father who art in heaven," I began, my voice shaking. "Hallowed be thy name," Ramiro joined in, his voice stronger than I expected. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done," my grandmother added. We prayed together, our voices rising and falling in unison, filling the small room with words of faith and protection. And slowly, so slowly, the shape in the corner began to fade. It did not disappear entirely, but it shrank, retreated, became less substantial. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the window, it was gone. But Miguelito was worse than ever. His fever had not broken. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than any shadow. He was slipping away. My baby was slipping away from me, and I did not know how to hold on to him. The fourth night was the night I will never forget as long as I live. It began like the others, with fever and crying and prayers whispered in the darkness. My grandmother was exhausted, having barely slept in 3 days. Ramiro was at the end of his strength, his face haggard, his hands shaking, and I was running on nothing but desperation and the fierce love I had for my son. Around midnight, Miguelito finally fell into a fitful sleep. My grandmother convinced me to rest for a few minutes, just close my eyes while she kept watch. I did not want to, but my body was failing me. I sat down in the corner farthest from the shadows and let my eyes fall closed. I do not know how long I slept. It might have been minutes, it might have been an hour. But I was jolted awake by a sound that sent ice through my veins. Silence. Complete and utter silence. No crying from Miguelito, no prayers from my grandmother, no breathing from Ramiro. No sound at all, as if the world itself had stopped. I opened my eyes. The room was different. The walls seemed to fade into endless darkness at their edges, as if the small space had expanded into something infinite and empty. The kerosene lamp still burned, but its light reached only a few feet before being swallowed by the void. And there beside Miguelito's cradle stood the woman in the black rebozo. I could see her clearly now in a way I had not been able to before. She was tall, impossibly tall. Her body bent at strange angles to fit beneath the ceiling. The black cloth that covered her still hid her face, but beneath it I could see movement, writhing, as if her features were constantly shifting, never settling into a fixed form. One of her hands, pale as bone and thin as sticks, was reaching toward my son. No. The word tore from my throat with a force I did not know I possessed. I lunged forward, throwing myself between the creature and the cradle, my arms spread wide, as if I could shield my baby with my body alone. The woman stopped. Her hand hung in the air, inches from my face. And then she laughed. It was not a human sound. It was the grinding of stones, the creaking of dead branches, the whisper of wind through an empty grave. It was the sound of something that had never been alive, mocking something that was. "You cannot stop me," she said, and her voice was inside my head, echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "He is mine now. You opened the door, you let me in, and now I will take what I am owed." "No," I said again. I forced myself to stand straight to meet the darkness where her face should be. "He is not yours. He will never be yours." The creature tilted her head, a gesture so human it was somehow more horrifying than anything else. "Look at you, so small, so weak, so full of fear. I can taste it, you know. Your terror, it is delicious. And your son's is even sweeter." She reached past me, her long fingers brushing the edge of the cradle. I felt cold radiate from her touch, a cold so deep it burned. And then I remembered what Don Cirillo had told me. It feeds on fear. Do not give in. Do not surrender. I closed my eyes. I thought of my grandmother, of her strength, of the generations of women who had come before me and faced darkness and survived. I thought of Ramiro, of his quiet love of the life we were building together. And I thought of Miguelito, my son, my heart, the best thing I'd ever done. "I'm not afraid of you." The words came out steady, calm, and as I spoke them I realized they were true. The fear was still there, but it was not controlling me anymore. I was controlling it. "I am not afraid of you," I repeated, opening my eyes to face the creature. "You have no power here. This is my home. That is my son, and you cannot have him." The woman in the black rebozo hissed a sound of pure rage. Her form seemed to flicker, to lose cohesion. "You think your faith can save you? You think your prayers mean anything? I have been here since before your people built their first temples. I will be here long after your bones have turned to dust." "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight. Tonight you lose." I began to pray. Not the desperate, fearful prayers I had been reciting for days, but something different, words of power and conviction, words that came from somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere in the very core of my being. The creature screamed. The sound was unbearable, a noise that seemed to pierce straight through my skull and into my brain. I felt blood trickle from my nose, felt my knees buckle, but I did not stop praying. I could not stop. My son's life depended on it. And then I woke up. I was on the floor of our room, gasping for breath, my face wet with tears and blood. The kerosene lamp flickered normally. The walls were solid. My grandmother was kneeling beside me, her face etched with concern. "It was a dream," I gasped. "Just a dream." But my grandmother shook her head. "Not a dream. A battle." She glanced toward the corner of the room, and I followed her gaze. "It is gone. Whatever was here, it is gone." I scrambled to my feet and rushed to Miguelito's cradle. He was sleeping, peacefully, quietly, without fever or trembling or tears. His skin was cool to the touch. His breathing was slow and steady. And when I picked him up, he stirred slightly, opened his eyes, and smiled at me. I collapsed into sobs, holding my son against my chest, feeling his warmth, his life, his precious heartbeat. Across the room, Ramiro stood frozen, staring at me with wide eyes. "What happened?" he whispered. "Marisol. What happened? I saw. I do not know what I saw, but you were screaming, and there was something dark, and then—" I shook my head. I did not have words to explain it to him. I did not have words to explain it to myself, but whatever had happened, we had survived it. Then I heard the sound. Footsteps. Outside our door. Heavy, uneven footsteps, like someone or something circling our house. "Do not open the door," my grandmother said sharply. "Do not go outside. We stay here until dawn." So we stayed. We huddled together in the center of the room, Miguelito cradled in my arms, Ramiro's hand gripping mine, my grandmother's prayers filling the air. And outside, the footsteps continued, around and around and around, pausing at each window, each door, testing, probing, looking for a way in. But they did not find one. When the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the footsteps stopped. The oppressive weight that had hung over our house for days lifted. And through the window, I watched the shadows retreat, chased away by the sun. It was over. The days that followed were like emerging from a long illness. Miguelito recovered quickly, as children do. Within a week he was laughing again, reaching for his rattle, babbling at me in his baby language. The pediatrician in the nearby town said his fever had probably been a viral infection, nothing serious. I nodded and smiled and did not try to explain. Sebastian recovered too. Don Cirillo continued his treatments, and slowly the color returned to his face, the strength to his body. When he came to visit us a few weeks later, I barely recognized him as the wasted, haunted man I had seen before. He brought flowers and an envelope full of money. "I know this cannot make up for what you went through," he said, his eyes bright with tears. "My sister told me everything. I am so sorry, Marisol. I had no idea the darkness following me could spread to others. I never meant to hurt your family." I accepted his apology because I believed it was genuine. He had been a victim, too, caught up in something he did not understand, targeted by a woman whose jealousy had led her to dabble in forces beyond her comprehension. None of it had been his fault. But I would never wash his clothes again. That part of my life was over. That night after Sebastian left, after Ramiro had gone to sleep and Miguelito was resting peacefully in his cradle, I did something I had been avoiding since the ordeal ended. I went to the pileta. The water basin stood in our small courtyard, ordinary and unassuming under the pale moonlight. It was just stone and cement and water. Nothing supernatural about it, nothing dangerous. But I needed to see it. I needed to know. I stood at its edge, looking down at the clear water, my reflection staring back at me in the dim light. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the sound of crickets, just the cool night air, just me and my reflection in the silence. Then I saw it. Behind my reflection there was another figure, tall, thin, shrouded in black. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Just the empty courtyard, just the moonlight, just the ordinary sounds of the village settling into sleep. When I turned back to the water, my reflection was alone, but as I stared at the surface, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Miguelito's cradle was visible through the open door of our room, and in the water's reflection, I could see my son sleeping peacefully, and I could see his left ankle. There on the skin that had been unmarked just days before were 5 small dots, arranged in a pattern that looked almost like fingerprints, like someone or something had grabbed his ankle and left a permanent mark. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a shadow on the water. But when I went inside and lifted the blanket from my sleeping son, the marks were there. 5 small dots, slightly darker than the surrounding skin, clustered on his left ankle like a brand. I did not sleep that night. I sat beside his cradle until dawn, watching him breathe, praying that what I had seen meant nothing. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed. That was more than 30 years ago. And the marks on my son's ankle have never faded. If anything, they have grown darker. I'm telling you this story now as a woman who has seen nearly 50 years of life, with gray streaking through my hair and lines carved deep into my face by decades of sun and worry and laughter. My hands are rough and calloused, the hands of someone who has worked every day of her life, but they are steady. They have learned to be steady. Miguelito is a grown man now. He lives in Mexico City with his wife, works for a construction company, and calls me every Sunday without fail. He does not remember anything about those terrible nights when he was a baby. He was too young to form memories, and I've never told him the full story. What would be the point? He would think his mother had lost her mind, that the isolation of village life had driven me to imagine monsters in the shadows. He is a modern man, my son. He believes in science and logic and things that can be measured and proven. He does not believe in the old ways. I do not blame him. I was the same once. Ramiro is still with me, though his hair is white now and his back is bent from years of carrying heavy loads. We never left the village. We talked about it sometimes in the years after everything happened about moving to the city, where there were more opportunities, better schools, a different kind of life. But something kept us here. Maybe it was my grandmother who needed us as she grew older. Maybe it was the work, the clients who depended on me. Or maybe it was the knowledge buried deep in my bones that running away would not protect us from the things that lurk in the spaces between worlds. Those things are everywhere. At least here I know the terrain. My grandmother passed away 10 years ago. She went peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, and I like to think she knew she was not alone. In her final days, she made me promise to keep the old ways alive, to never stop praying, to never forget what she had taught me about protection and faith and the dangers that most people refuse to believe exist. I have kept that promise. I still work as a lavandera. It is the only trade I know, the only skill I possess, and despite everything that happened, I cannot imagine doing anything else. But I work differently now than I did when I was young and foolish and thought I knew better than generations of women who came before me. Every morning before I touch a single piece of fabric, I pray. Not a quick, thoughtless recitation of words I barely remember, but a real prayer spoken from the heart, asking for protection and guidance. I wear my grandmother's rosary around my neck at all times, even when I sleep, even when I bathe. The wooden beads are worn smooth now from years of my fingers running over them, but the faith they represent has only grown stronger. When a new client approaches me, I ask questions. Gentle questions phrased carefully so as not to give offense, but questions nonetheless. I want to know about their lives, their circumstances, their troubles. If something feels wrong, if that cold prickle starts at the back of my neck, I politely decline the work. No amount of money is worth risking my family's safety. I learned that lesson the hard way. Every night without exception, I burn herbs in my home, Ruda Romero Albahaca. The smoke drifts through the rooms, cleansing the air, purifying the space, keeping the shadows at bay. My neighbors think I am eccentric, a superstitious old woman clinging to outdated beliefs. Let them think what they want. I know what I have seen. I know what is real. The birthmark on Miguelito's ankle has been my secret for over 30 years. I noticed it the night after the entity retreated, when I checked my sleeping son by the light of the pileta's reflection. 5 small dots arranged like fingerprints, as if something had grabbed him and left its signature behind. The doctors have always said it is just a birthmark, a cluster of pigmentation that means nothing. They say these things appear sometimes, that there is no medical significance, that I should not worry about it. But the birthmark was not there before those 4 terrible nights. And every year on the anniversary of his fever it grows slightly darker, only a little. So little that you would not notice unless you were looking for it. But I notice. I have been watching that mark for over 30 years, and I know what I see. Each year the 5 dots become more defined, more prominent, as if whatever made them is slowly tightening its grip. I do not know what this means. Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps it is just the normal changes that happen to skin as we age, a coincidence that my frightened mind has turned into something sinister. Perhaps I am indeed the superstitious old woman my neighbors believe me to be. But I pray for my son every single day. Every morning and every night I ask God to protect him from the darkness that once tried to claim him. I pray that the mark on his ankle is just a scar, a reminder of a battle won, not a chain binding him to something that waits with infinite patience. Because if there is one thing I learned from my ordeal, it is that the things in the darkness do not give up. They do not forget. They simply wait, watching from the shadows, biding their time until the right moment comes. Last week, Miguelito called me with news. His wife is pregnant. Their first child. My first grandchild. I cried with joy when he told me. I blessed them both, wished them health and happiness, asked all the questions a mother asks when she learns she is going to be a grandmother. When is the baby due? Have you thought about names? Do you want a boy or a girl? They've already chosen a name, Miguelito told me proudly. If it is a girl, they will call her Luciana. It was his wife's grandmother's name, he explained, and they both thought it was beautiful. Luciana. I rolled the name around in my mind, tasting it. It was beautiful, a name full of light. That night I knelt beside my bed to pray, as I have done every night for more than 30 years. The rosary was warm in my hands, familiar as my own heartbeat. I closed my eyes and began to speak the words I know better than my own name. And then I heard it, a whisper. So soft it might have been the wind through the cracks in the window. So faint it might have been nothing at all. But it was not nothing. It was a voice. A woman's voice, distant and cold like sound traveling across a vast empty space. And it said a name. Luciana. My eyes flew open. My heart slammed against my ribs. The room was dark, lit only by the small candle I always keep burning, and in the flickering shadows I saw nothing unusual. Nothing moved, nothing lurked in the corners. But I had heard it. I know I heard it. The name of my unborn grandchild. The name that had been chosen only yesterday. The name that I had learned only hours before through a telephone call. How did it know? What is it waiting for? I did not sleep that night. I sat up until dawn, praying, burning herbs, clutching my rosary until the beads left marks in my palms. When the sun finally rose, I felt no relief. Only a cold certainty that something I thought was finished has only been sleeping. 30 years. It waited 30 years. And now my son is about to have a child of his own, and the darkness has stirred again. I'm going to visit Miguelito next month when his wife is further along in her pregnancy. I will bring gifts for the baby clothes and blankets and the little things that new parents need. But I will also bring other things. Holy water, herbs, a rosary blessed by the priest. And I will teach my son's wife the prayers that my grandmother taught me, whether she believes in them or not. Because some doors once open can never be fully closed. And some things never truly let go of what they consider theirs. I am telling you this story for a reason. If you work a job that requires you to handle other people's belongings, be careful. Clothes, furniture, jewelry, anything that has been close to another person's body, anything that has absorbed their energy, their emotions, their pain. You do not know what they carry. You do not know what might be clinging to the fabric waiting for a new host. Protect yourself. Pray if you believe in prayer. Carry symbols of your faith, whatever that faith may be. And if something feels wrong, if you sense a darkness that has no logical explanation, do not ignore it. Do not tell yourself it is just your imagination. Do not make the mistake I made. Listen to the old ones. Listen to your grandmother, your mother, the elders who remember the ways that kept our ancestors safe. They know things that science has not yet learned to measure. They have seen things that textbooks do not acknowledge. And if you ever feel something following you, something cold and patient and hungry, do not show it your fear. Fear is what it feeds on. Fear is what gives it power. Stand firm in your faith, whatever that faith may be, and do not let it see you waver. That is all the advice I can give you. That is the only wisdom I have earned through my suffering. I hope you never need it. I hope your life remains untouched by the shadows that touched mine. But if the darkness ever comes for you, remember my story. Remember that I survived. Remember that you can survive too. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt something attach itself to you after touching another person's belongings? Have you ever sensed a presence that had no explanation? Have you ever looked into a dark corner and seen something looking back? Tell me your stories. Share your experiences. Because we are not alone in this, any of us. The darkness is everywhere, and the only way to fight it is together. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of ordinary people who encountered extraordinary evil and lived to tell about it, then come back. I will be here. There are always more stories to tell. Until then, be careful. Watch the shadows. And remember, some things that cling to the clothes are not just dirt. Some things are much, much worse.